My friends, let us not deceive ourselves with comforting illusions. The path of transformation, the path of truth, is not wide, it is narrow, steep, and lonely. 90% will not survive this journey. Not because the world conspires against them, but because they will betray themselves. They will fall into the arms of comfort, hide in the shadows of conformity, and abandon the call of their inner voice. To survive is not to exist, but to confront, to stand before the abyss of your own soul and refuse to look away. Survival belongs to those who are willing to die to the false self and be reborn into authenticity. The narrow gate is never inviting. It does not promise ease, nor does it welcome the masses. It is small, hidden, and requires one to bow, to let go of what is unnecessary, to strip oneself of the excess weight of illusions and borrowed identities. To step through this gate is to leave behind the applause of the crowd and to accept the silence that only a few dare to endure. Most will walk past it, preferring the wide road that asks for nothing but conformity, where one can be carried by the flow of the collective and never face the terror of standing alone. Yet, this is why 90% will never make it through. The gate of individuation is not a passage of comfort, it is a threshold of fire. To walk through it is to agree to meet yourself in raw honesty, to encounter your shadow, your contradictions, and your forgotten depths. It is not a journey of adding more, but of shedding, peeling away the masks, the roles, the lies you once thought were your truth. And in this stripping, you feel naked, vulnerable, exposed to the winds of existence without protection. But that very vulnerability becomes the first taste of real strength. Those who pass through this narrow gate discover a life not dictated by the demands of society or the illusions of external success, but one aligned with the deeper self, the eternal source within. They may not be many, for the gate does not allow crowds, but each soul who dares to enter carries a light that no darkness can extinguish. Survival, then, is not guaranteed by numbers, but by the courage to choose the lonely path that leads to authenticity. To confront the shadow is to step into the cave you have avoided your entire life, the one you pretend does not exist, though you feel its breath on your back. The shadow is everything you repress, deny, and exile within yourself. Your fears, your desires, your rage, your envy, your grief. It is the mirror that reflects not the face you show the world, but the face you dare not even show yourself. Most turn away because the sight is unbearable. They prefer to project their darkness onto others, to accuse, to condemn, to see in the world what they refuse to acknowledge in their own souls. This is why 90% will never survive. They will run from themselves and drown in the very shadows they deny. But survival demands confrontation. It demands that you enter that cave with no weapons, no excuses, no masks, and that you look directly at the monstrous figure waiting within. You may tremble, you may feel you are being swallowed whole, but in truth, the shadow is not your enemy, it is your teacher. It holds the keys to your hidden strength, your unlived potential, and your deepest wisdom. To embrace the shadow is to retrieve the gold buried beneath the darkness, to reclaim the fragments of yourself that were cast away. This confrontation is not a single act but a lifelong dialogue. Again and again, you will meet your shadow in relationships, in conflict, in failure, in the silent hours of solitude. Each time, you are asked, will you turn away in fear, or will you accept this dissound part of yourself as your own? Few will say yes, few will embrace the discomfort. But those who do, those rare 10%, become whole. They transform the poison into medicine, the wound into a doorway, the darkness into a source of light. The fire of transformation does not arrive gently, nor does it seek your permission. It comes like a storm, fierce and unrelenting, consuming everything that is false, fragile, and unworthy of the self. This fire burns through illusions, through the masks carefully crafted to protect you, through the walls you built to keep pain away. Most will flee from it, terrified that they are being destroyed, but what is being destroyed is only the false structure of who they thought they were. The essence remains untouched, purified, refined, revealed in a brilliance that was hidden all along. Transformation is not comfort, it is crucifixion and resurrection. It is the tearing down of old identities, the death of the ego's illusions, the shattering of everything that once seemed stable. The 90% will not endure this fire, because they cling to the ashes of what is familiar, unwilling to surrender control. They choose safety over truth, stagnation over growth, illusion over authenticity. But the 10% who step into the flames discover that within the very heart of destruction lies the seed of creation. The fire teaches that pain is not the enemy, it is the alchemist. It melts the hardness of the heart, it bends the rigid structures of the mind, it clears the way for something higher to emerge. In the blaze, you do not lose yourself, you lose only what was never truly you. What emerges from the fire is a being tempered, unshakable, carrying a strength born not of avoidance, but of endurance. To pass through the fire is to know freedom, it is to rise from your own ashes, no longer bound by fear, no longer enslaved by false identities, but alive in the raw truth of who you are. The world may not understand you, it may even fear you, but you will carry within you a light that cannot be extinguished, a radiance born only through fire. Comfort is a sweet poison, offered with a smile but carrying the seeds of decay. It whispers promises of safety, ease, and predictability. It tells you that you have done enough, that you can rest without having truly lived, that the struggle is unnecessary, that mediocrity is acceptable. Most will drink deeply from this cup, unaware that every sip dulls the fire of the soul. 90% will perish here, not by sudden catastrophe, but by the slow erosion of their will, the quiet surrender to a life half-lived. Comfort seduces because it feels good in the moment. It shields you from the raw winds of uncertainty and the sting of challenge. It allows you to sleep while the world passes you by, to avoid the suffering that growth demands. But what comfort never tells you is that while it shelters you from pain, it also starves you of transformation. It suffocates the spirit, turning vitality into apathy, potential into regret. The few who survive know that true life exists beyond the veil of comfort. They resist the temptation to settle, to stay in the warmth of the familiar, to numb themselves with distractions. They understand that comfort is not peace, it is stagnation dressed in softness. They choose instead the harder road, the road of effort, of risk, of uncertainty, because they know only in the unknown can the self truly awaken. Resisting comfort is not about rejecting rest or denying moments of reprieve, it is about refusing to let ease become a prison. It is about walking into discomfort willingly, seeing in challenge not an enemy, but a guide. The 10% who endure discomfort discover a vitality that others never taste. They burn brighter, live fuller, and leave behind a legacy carved not in avoidance but in courage. To stand alone is one of the greatest trials of the soul, and it is the reason most will falter before they ever reach the summit of their own becoming. Human beings are wired to seek the comfort of the tribe, to belong, to be affirmed, to hear the echo of their voices in the crowd. Yet individuation, the true path of the self, demands a breaking away from that collective embrace. It demands the courage to hear your own voice even when it trembles, to hold your truth even when it is met with silence, or worse, with ridicule. The 90% will not stand alone because the weight of isolation feels unbearable. They would rather trade their authenticity for acceptance, their integrity for applause. They fear rejection more than they fear spiritual death, and so they remain hidden within the herd, safe but silent, alive but not truly living. But the few who dare to endure solitude discover a paradox, that standing alone does not mean being empty. It means being whole. In the stillness of aloneness, you hear the whispers of your deeper self, the call that is drowned out when you are surrounded by the noise of the collective. You come to see that truth does not need an audience, it needs only your fidelity. To stand alone is to walk through nights of doubt, through storms of criticism, through deserts where no one affirms your path. Yet in this wilderness, you grow roots into your own being, and you learn that strength is not borrowed, it is born from within. Those who can withstand the loneliness find that it eventually transforms into freedom. They are no longer chained by the need to please or to conform, and in their authenticity, they shine as rare beacons for others lost in the fog of imitation. The courage to stand alone is not a rejection of others, but a commitment to the self. It is the path of the 10%, the path of those who would rather walk alone in truth than march with the many in lies. And it is these few who shape the world, not by blending in, but by daring to stand apart. Authenticity is the rarest jewel of the soul, and yet most will trade it cheaply for the glittering counterfeit of approval. From childhood we are conditioned to seek validation, gold stars, applause, recognition, the nod of acceptance from parents, teachers, peers, society. Slowly, the authentic voice within us is silenced, muffled beneath layers of should and must, until we no longer know where the world's expectations end and where we begin. To survive as the true self requires that we tear away these bindings, no matter how beloved they have become. Approval is intoxicating, but it is fleeting. It shifts with the winds of opinion, with the trends of culture, with the moods of the collective. To live for approval is to live as a slave, forever bending, forever hiding, forever performing. This is the fate of the 90%. They cling to the comfort of being liked, of being accepted, of belonging. Even if it means abandoning their deepest truth, they may survive in the eyes of others, but inside something withers and dies. Authenticity, by contrast, is rooted in eternity. It does not bend to the whims of the crowd. It does not depend on applause, for it carries its own resonance, its own power. To be authentic is to speak the words that tremble on your lips, even if no one wishes to hear them. It is to walk the path that feels true, even if it is steep and empty. It is to live in harmony with your inner self, even when the world calls you strange, rebellious, or mad. This is not an easy task. To choose authenticity over approval often means to be misunderstood, to be judged, even to be cast out. Yet the paradox is that only by enduring this exile do you find your true belonging, not in the crowd, but in yourself. And once you are rooted in your authenticity, the right people, the right circumstances, and the right destiny gravitate toward you, drawn not to a mask but to the radiance of the real. The 10% will always be the few who choose authenticity, not because it is easy, but because it is the only path that does not betray the soul. Approval may grant temporary comfort, but authenticity grants freedom, and freedom is the oxygen of true survival. The inner warrior is not born in noise and spectacle but in silence, in the hidden battles of the soul. Discipline is its weapon, not the discipline imposed from outside, but the inner strength that commands the self when no one is watching. The 90% will fail here, because they wait for motivation, for inspiration, for someone else to push them forward. They crave external force to move them, but when the moment comes to stand alone against laziness, fear, and doubt, they collapse. They survive only as long as conditions are easy, but fall apart when hardship demands endurance. The inner warrior does not rely on moods or circumstances. It rises even when the body is weary, even when the mind whispers excuses, even when the heart longs for comfort. Discipline is the choice to remain faithful to the higher path, to act in alignment with the self regardless of the cost. It is the refusal to bow to impulses, to addictions, to the endless seductions of distraction. This is the discipline that forges the rare 10%, those who do not wait for life to become easier, but become stronger than life itself. Discipline of the inner warrior is not harshness for its own sake. It is not cruelty toward the self. Rather, it is devotion. It is the recognition that the self deserves loyalty, that your deepest purpose is worthy of sacrifice. It is the art of training your own chaos into order, your scattered energies into focus, your fears into fuel. The warrior does not fight for approval, for rewards, or for comfort, but for integrity, for truth, for the fulfillment of destiny. And this discipline is not a single victory. It is a daily battle. It is waking up each morning and recommitting to the path, even when yesterday you failed, even when tomorrow is uncertain. The inner warrior knows that freedom is won not in one moment of glory, but in countless unseen moments of self-conquest. Few will master this, but those who do carry within themselves a strength that cannot be shaken by the storms of life. Their survival is not fragile, it is absolute. They do not merely endure, they shape their own fate. The voice of the self is subtle, almost imperceptible, and this is why so many ignore it or drown it out. It does not shout like the demands of society, nor seduce like the whispers of comfort, nor threaten like the roar of fear. It speaks in a quiet certainty, in moments of silence, in the stillness between thoughts. It is the compass buried within the soul, pointing always toward what is true, even when it defies logic, convenience, or the expectations of others. The tragedy of the 90% is that they never learn to hear this voice. They are so entangled in the noise of the collective, in the endless chatter of opinions, in the constant pull of distractions, that the inner call becomes faint, almost forgotten. They exchange the wisdom of the self for the approval of the crowd, and in doing so, they survive outwardly while inwardly perishing. Yet the 10% learn to recognize it. They begin by noticing the discomfort that arises when they betray themselves, the gnawing unease that comes from ignoring their own truth. Over time, they attune themselves to this inner guidance, treating it not as a fleeting feeling but as a sacred directive. The voice of the self is not always comforting. Often it leads into difficulty, into risk, into the unknown. But it never deceives. It never leads one away from wholeness. To follow this voice requires courage, for it often contradicts what the world demands. It may ask you to leave behind what is secure, to stand against what is popular, to choose a path that appears lonely or even foolish. But those who heed it discover that while the road may be narrow, it is alive with meaning. Each step taken in alignment with the self brings strength, clarity, and a sense of inner peace that no external validation can provide. The voice of the self is the survival instinct of the soul, not survival of the body alone, but of the spirit. To ignore it is to live in quiet despair. To follow it is to step into authenticity, into destiny, into the fullness of being. This is the gift given only to the few, the ones who choose to listen when all others turn away. The false self is a mask carefully woven over years of survival, stitched together from expectations, fears, and borrowed identities. It is the you that exists to be approved of the you, that pleases, that conforms, that hides its edges so it may fit neatly into the world's demands. For most, this mask becomes indistinguishable from their face. They mistake the costume for their essence, and they live entire lives imprisoned within roles they never chose. This is why 90% will not survive, because they cling to the mask, even as it suffocates them. The sacrifice of the false self is not gentle. It is a tearing away, a death that feels like annihilation. When you strip off the mask, you feel naked before existence, vulnerable, exposed. Every belief you borrowed, every identity you clung to, every false comfort you built, these must fall into the fire, and as they burn, you may feel you are losing yourself. In truth, you are losing only the cage, not the bird. What dies is the illusion. What remains is the eternal. This sacrifice requires immense courage, for the false self has grown familiar. It promises safety, belonging, and recognition. To abandon it is to risk rejection, misunderstanding, even exile. Yet the greater danger lies in keeping it, for the false self cannot endure the trials of life. It fractures, it weakens, it collapses under the weight of truth. The authentic self, however, once revealed, is indestructible. Those who dare to sacrifice the false self step into a freedom the 90% will never know. No longer bound by performance, they can finally live. No longer enslaved to expectation, they can finally create. No longer hiding behind masks, they can finally connect. Not as a persona, but as a soul. The sacrifice of the false self is the great threshold. Few will cross it, but those who do emerge transformed, luminous, carrying within them the strength of one who has died to illusion and been reborn into truth. And in that rebirth, survival is no longer mere endurance, it is liberation. The destiny of the few is not written in ease, nor in the approval of the many. It is carved in struggle, in silence, in the inner battles that no one else sees. The path of the 10% is narrow, because it demands a relentless fidelity to the self, a refusal to betray one's truth for comfort or applause. They are the ones who withstand the fire, who confront their shadows, who tear away the mask of the false self, even when it costs them everything. For this reason, their destiny diverges radically from the 90% who choose the wide road of conformity. The destiny of the few is not survival in the ordinary sense. It is not the shallow endurance of merely breathing, paying bills, and obeying rules. Their survival is of a higher order. The survival of the soul, the triumph of the spirit, the flowering of what is eternal within. They are not content to exist in repetition. They live as creators, as builders of meaning, as carriers of light into places the collective has abandoned. Because they walk alone, the few often feel misunderstood, even rejected. But history, myth, and the archetypes of the human psyche remind us that it is always the minority who bear the torch of transformation. Moses walks alone up the mountain. Buddha sits alone beneath the tree. Christ bleeds alone in the garden. The destiny of the few is archetypal. It is to walk where the many refuse to tread, so that something greater may be born for all. This destiny is not a gift without cost. It demands the sacrifice of ease, the abandonment of illusions, the courage to endure exile. But in return, it grants what the masses will never taste: authenticity, inner peace, and the unshakable strength of one who has been refined by truth. The few are not spared suffering, they are deepened by it. They are not spared struggle, they are forged by it. They are not spared death, they learn to live beyond its shadow. And so, the destiny of the few becomes the destiny of humanity itself. For though they are small in number, they carry within them the seeds of renewal. They remind the world that life is more than survival, that truth is more than conformity, that the soul is greater than the mask. The 90% may remain asleep, but the 10% awaken, and in their awakening, they open the way for others to follow. This is the destiny of the few: to rise where others fall, to endure where others flee, to live fully where others merely exist. They are not chosen by chance, they are chosen by choice, by the daily decision to stand with truth, no matter the cost. And in the end, it is not the many who shape the future, but the few who dared to survive as their true selves. When I say 90% won't survive, it is not a condemnation, it is an invitation. For if you have heard these words, if they stir something within you, then perhaps you are being summoned to the remaining 10%, to the warriors of spirit who dare to live fully, even in a world of sleepwalkers.